Welcome to Copenhagen, capital of Denmark. Is this the closest thing to a fairy tale city you can find? The thing that people tend to forget about fairy tales is that it's not just fun adventures and exotic places to visit. The stories can often end in misery and be quite depressing. Is that gonna be a metaphor for this Copenhagen trip? I guess we'll just have to explore the city and find out. Every fairy tale needs a castle, so it's a good thing that Copenhagen has quite a few of those. Amalienborg Palace is the home of the Danish royal family, and it consists of 4 different main buildings. It was actually built for 4 different noble families, but when the old royal palace burnt down in 1794, the royal family simply bought the place, kicked out the nobles, and moved in here instead. This is where you see the changing of the guard with the Danish royal lifeguard. Despite the name lifeguard, there doesn't seem to be a lake or sea here. Sorry, I'll see myself out now. You can get a lovely view of the palace as well as the marble church in the background from here, but you have to look up at a horse's butt to see it. Oh well, it could be worse. Christiansborg Palace is where you find the Danish parliament, Folketinget, but many of the rooms are also used by the Danish king. Apparently he's not satisfied with just having Amalienborg. There have actually been many palaces and castles at this site. The first one was Absalon's castle in 1167, and then Copenhagen Castle in the late 14th century. Then the first Christiansborg, which burned down in 1794, and then the second Christiansborg, which burned down in 1884. They just won't give up, will they? But maybe this palace will remain. This castle is called Rosenborg, and it was built in 1606 as a country summer home for the king. You can see the Danish crown jewels and the crown regalia here, and it's quite a lovely castle in a very central location. Rosenborg Royal Garden is Denmark's oldest royal garden, and around 2.5 million people visit it every year. Things are looking pretty good so far. Copenhagen has enough castles and palaces to live up to being a fairy tale city. But a fairy tale city needs to be fun as well. Is there anything fun to do in Copenhagen? Tivoli Gardens opened in 1843, and it's the 3rd oldest amusement park in the world. Every year, 4.6 million people visit this park, and it's the 5th most visited amusement park in Europe. Not too shabby for a small Scandinavian country. It's located right in the middle of Copenhagen though. Tourists coming to the city simply can't miss this park. There are some neat rides here. My personal favorite is Demonen, but Rutschkanen needs a special mention. It was built in 1914 and it's still going strong. It's one of the world's oldest still running wooden coasters. For a more quiet experience, you can visit the Round Tower. It was built in the 17th century as an astronomical observatory. One of the most notable features of the tower is the equestrian staircase. It has a gentle slope so that horses could be led up the tower. Speaking of 4-legged animals and Danish astronomers, did you know that Tycho Brahe had a pet moose that died when it got drunk and fell down a staircase? I'm saving the full story of that one for another time. Look at this, the Round Tower Privy that was in use up until 1902. Not the nicest toilet I've seen. These days the Round Tower is mostly used by tourists who want to get a great view of Copenhagen, but it has some other uses as well. There's a yearly unicycle race here to get up and down the tower fastest. The record is from 1988 at 1 minute 48.7 seconds. Now you know. They have a section of the tower called the Fairytale Tower. I think it's meant for kids, but that's never stopped me so far. Very strange. I hear barking and weird noises. Why is there a bunch of food inside this hole? What is this? Well, it certainly fits with the fairy tale theme of the video, I think. Look at that magnificent building. It's a 17th century stock market. That spire is just amazing. Yeah, thank you very much. I've noticed. Strøget is one of the longest pedestrian shopping streets in Europe, and it's also one of Copenhagen's most famous landmarks. For being such a famous landmark of the city, it's actually quite plain. It's just a shopping street like so many others. Strøget became a pedestrian street in 1962 as a step toward making Copenhagen more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. This is a change that's been influential internationally. Other cities also started to make changes to the city centers to make them more pedestrian friendly, all thanks to Strøget. Along the street you can find many different types of stores, but I'm gonna check out this one in particular, Faraos Cigarer. The name of the store comes from a Tintin comic book, and this is the prime geek store brand in Denmark. Each store focuses on a specific type of geekdom. This is the comic book store, but they have other stores focusing on, for example, computer games or board games. There are other geek stores in Copenhagen, like Fantasken, Nintendo Pusheren and Animerch, but Faraos Cigarer is probably the most famous. The Lego store is also located at Strøget. Lego was created in 1934, and the name is short for the Danish phrase "lek godt," which means play well. They also noted that Lego could be loosely interpreted as Latin for I assemble or I put together. The translation is a little bit of a stretch, but it fits very well for the Lego products. The biggest Lego set available right now is the Colosseum at 9,036 pieces. The previous biggest set was the Millennium Falcon at 7,541 pieces, and unfortunately I don't own either of these sets. Close to Strøget you can find Nyhavn. This is possibly the most famous place in all of Copenhagen. Nyhavn is a 17th century waterfront filled with gorgeous boats and houses and lots of cafes and bars. This place used to be notorious for sailors and drunken debauchery and prostitution in the 17th century. These days it's notorious for being filled with overpriced tourist traps instead. But then again, maybe the view makes it worth it. Speaking of fairy tales and Copenhagen, it's impossible to not talk about Hans Christian Andersen. This is the Hans Christian Andersen experience. I think it could be a little bit of a rip-off, but that's okay. I'm sure it's gonna be fun anyway. I don't think I need to explain who Hans Christian Andersen is. He wrote 156 fairy tales that have been translated to 125 languages. Some of his most famous stories include The Emperor's New Clothes, The Snow Queen and The Little Mermaid. I wonder if Disney are gonna borrow more of his fairy tales. I think even they can't make The Little Match Girl into a family-friendly story. That one is pretty gruesome. Fun fact, Hans Christian Andersen had a pretty complicated love life. As a young man he was celibate and refused to have sex. He also expressed his longing for unattainable women and for a few men as well. In general, he seemed to have had some issues when it comes to emotions and sex, but that of course has no impact at all on the fantastic fairy tales he wrote. Now we need to talk about one of the most famous landmarks of Copenhagen, the Little Mermaid statue. The Little Mermaid is one of the most beloved fairy tales that Hans Christian Andersen wrote. It's quite a pity that the statue is pretty disappointing then. It's small and unimpressive, and it's constantly surrounded by tourists thinking, well, is this it? I was expecting a bit more. The Little Mermaid statue is one of Europe's most disappointing tourist attractions, and quite frankly, it deserves a spot on that list. Don't be fooled, I think they're really disappointed even though they're taking pictures with the statue. People apparently like messing around with the statue. The head has been sawed off multiple times, it's been blown off the base with explosives, and it's been dressed up in various ways. Personally, I think the best way the Little Mermaid gets dressed up is when people put Swedish football jerseys on her. We've gone from a relatively happy video to talking about disappointments. Let's see if I can find even more negative things to say about Copenhagen. Copenhagen is an expensive city to visit. It may look like a fairy tale place, but if you spend too much time here, you're gonna end up bankrupt. The weather is pretty crap in Copenhagen as well. It rains a lot, it snows, it hails, the winters are long and cold in Scandinavia, and the summers aren't really that great either. Don't get me wrong, it's lovely when it's warm and sunny, but it's not that often that it happens. Also, Americans visiting Copenhagen may have issues with the quality of service offered here. Waiting staff aren't super attentive, and some people may even find them a bit rude. Tipping isn't really a big thing in the Nordics, so the level of service isn't comparable to, for example, the US. Personally, I prefer Danish honesty to fake smiles you can get in other countries. Danish food is something that gets a lot of praise, but not by everyone. Nutritionists have raised concerns about the levels of meat, sugar, fat, and lack of vegetables in Danish food. But come to think of it, maybe that's why so many people like it. Those were some things to critique about Copenhagen at least. It may not be exactly a fairy tale city. It's windy as hell for one thing. But the positives certainly outweigh the negatives. I hope you enjoyed hanging out in Copenhagen with me. Like and subscribe, but most importantly, have a great day.